I'll be done pretty quickly here, and then we can turn it over to Mauricio. This is an image that we frequently, actually, I think this gets called the bacon and eggs map of Portland. It's really just kind of to set an organizing framework for the citywide strategy, which we've focused in on the central city, and then also another effort on the centers and corridors. There is some geographic overlap. There's also some overlap in principle. You'll see this figure again as Mauricio and Grant go through their presentations. And this is my last slide, and then I'll be able to turn it over. But this kind of shows the timeline of the major milestones. Those squares show, and the lines show, the processes for the Centers and Corridors project, the Central City project, and at the same time, we also did a downtown meter rate adjustment over the course of last summer. The timeline actually started, the committee started meeting in December of 2014. This graphic starts in April. That's just when we had created it. Over the course of this time, both of these stakeholder advisory committees met about 10 times each. We think we spent about 1,000 collective hours with them. We ate about 1,000 pizzas with them. We also had a parking symposium in June, which was an all-day-long event with really great attendance, and over 40 different outreach meetings to community groups and business groups. We think that we actually have counts that we touched about 900 different people had an opportunity to hear from us and to weigh in on this with us. So I think that the work that you're going to hear tonight is really the recommendations of the two advisory committees with a lot of public input. So with that, I thank you for your time and for your patience on the audio. I turn it over to Mauricio.
Can you hear me? All right. Mauricio Leclerc? Yeah. So we'll do two things. A brief history of parking. We have a long history in Portland of understanding the impacts of parking on urban form, and I think we learned the lesson a lot earlier than other cities, and so that's important for us because it sets the context of where we're going. We are not changing pace, we're not changing path, I guess, or direction. Rather, we're fine-tuning our recommendations, as Judith said, to the 21st century and to the needs, the new challenges that have evolved as we grow as a city. So last thing I'll say, that the recommendations that you'll hear from the Central City and the Centers and Corridor were very well received by the public to date, and they were adopted by consensus by the committees that we formed. This is a picture of Lloyd District in the 60s. Lloyd, one of the models for the nation, the new mall. It was direct competition from across the river in downtown. You can see a little bit of the housing on the lower right, but the new model was built as much parking as you can, and that's the way that you'll get great economic development, great urban form. That's the future. Highways, and you don't have to hit, if you can avoid hitting pavement, that's great. Of course, you end up walking a lot on parking lots, but they never told you that story. So, but the history actually starts way earlier for how we managed parking. In 1937, a person in the Midwest invented the parking meter. It was an instant success. A year later, Portland and other cities were all over this. Why? Because we had a new problem. Model T and other cars became cheap. Suddenly everybody had them, and all the employees were parking on the curb. And the retailers were saying, hey, wait a minute, that's not right. What about the retailers? So new policies were put in place to actually encourage that space, the curb zone that we're calling now, be dedicated for retail. And since then, that's the policy that we have today, and that's the policy that we carry forward, except that we didn't have a way to monitor and to enforce it. I went back to get these pictures, articles in the Oregonian that would probably policemen, a lot of police time was used in trying to enforce this. When this person came with this idea, paying for parking, it generated a lot of angst, but a year later, after it was implemented in the first city, I think it was Columbus or Cleveland, Ohio, all over the place and the country, they were introducing this with some angst, but then pretty much it was the 10 blocks around, basically 1,300 spaces around the old downtown core now. A total success, and ever since we have expanded it. And so we basically have the policy that we had in place. You pay with the coin in the meter since the 30s, and actually that's the policy we have today. We haven't quite The technology has changed, but our policy hasn't quite, so we'll show you how we're going to change that. The other key factor in this is the picture on the right, that as we expanded the meter area, what happened to those commuters that were trying to kick off the curb? They began to park right outside the meter area, right? And then you walk into your work. So we began, another tool that got developed was the permit program. That's the first one. Gander Ridge, just south of PSU, on the other side of the freeway. That's Zone B today. So that's another tool that we have now, but it was addressed for commuters, people who were not coming to Gander Ridge, that actually were going to downtown and parking in Gander Ridge. So that's the policy, and that's the meter policy that we have today. In reality, as you know, probably better than anybody, we have different problems today. Are not commuters coming to an area and moving on. Actually, people coming to restaurants in the area, people coming to work. And that's the new challenge that we have, particularly outside of the central city, along Hawthorne Division in Hollywood Town Centers. And so basically, we have a new permit program to address that issue. And Grant will talk about that. So moving forward, we gave all the space we could to the car, because otherwise, we needed to compete with the suburbs. We ended up that in the 1970s, downtown and the city of Portland had severe clear air quality violations. In the 70s, we got out of compliance with the new Clean Air Act 1 out of 3 days, and something needed to be done. Basically, it was choking literally the development of the central city. The federal government was saying you need to do something, otherwise we won't be able to allow you to grow anymore. So in 1975, working with the Department of Environmental Quality, we developed a plan, a downtown parking and circulation policy that created a parking cap, about 40,000 stalls, limit no new surface parking lots, and expanding on the transit service and so forth. And this is the time of the 1972 plan, so there was a whole new mentality for how to do planning in downtown areas, and that tradition continues today. But that was the beginning. We needed to respond to air quality. So basically, we were killing downtown in order to save it, taking down old buildings, and actually end up with a lot of pollution. That was not a winning strategy. So we changed course in the 70s. And that's where we are today. So basically, the new rule, once we began to analyze the planners at the time, they realized that to accommodate the growth that we needed to revitalize the central city, we needed about 6 U.S. Bank towers just to parking stalls. And that was not a winning solution for anybody, nor was it affordable, nor was it good, since we have always had limited capacity on our streets. So we needed to limit the growth of parking. So that's what we did in the 70s, and that was reaffirmed in 1995 in the Central City with the CCTMP, Central City Transportation Management Plan, which actually lifted that cap, but imposed a new way of managing parking by pinching the supply, meaning allow parking to grow above the cap, but not grow so much. Let development, the people coming in, living and working in downtown, grow at a faster rate than your parking supply. And that's what we've done since at the same time that we're invested in transit, walking, and now increasingly bicycle. And the strategy has worked, not just because of the investment in transit and other modes, but also because of the cleaner vehicle technology and fuel. So we haven't had a carbon monoxide violation since 1987. But new challenges have come up. So let's see. So we started the citywide parking strategy with, as Judith said, with 3 committees largely. We had Chris Smith in 2 of them, so we appreciate their help. And we had a TSP, Transportation Expert Group, look at our policies from a TSP comprehensive plan level to make sure that we were coming up with was in alignment, in sync with the comp plan policies that we all came up together collectively over this last few years. So the packet that we gave you has a brief summary of all the things that are going on related to parking. This is just a summary up here. It's quite complex, and we apologize for that, but basically what we're doing is using the comprehensive plan policies that we developed to guide planning processes that are currently underway. That's the Middle Road, Central City 2035, mixed-use zoning, campus institution, Northwest parking. They will be coming to you or to City Council at some point. We'll be talking about 2 of them today. But note that not only do we have a lot of projects touching a lot of the geography, but also we have a level of complexity from comp plan, highest policy, all the way to zoning, Title 33, and also other elements of the city code, Title 16, vehicles and traffic, and Title 17 public improvements that touch on other elements, non-zoning elements of transportation policy, and some of them get even to the lower level administrative rules. So we won't get to this level today, but so you understand the complexity of it, and hopefully helps you navigate as we move forward with these projects and bring them to implementation. So these are the ones for today, and we'll give you a quick summary. So where we are today, now we're just bringing you to today. That's pretty much on the history, but talking to the 1,000 people and having conversations and developing policies on the comp plan, there are about 3 things that we're particularly focusing on. One is to better use the parking that we have, the existing parking. If Smart Park is an example here, but also private lots, they end up being used for the peak or for whatever purpose and then empty for much of the time. And then the next tower comes and they build their parking, and in reality, that's an underutilization of a very valuable, expensive asset. So we wanted to be able to better simplify regulations to allow more what we're calling sharing of parking, so that we get a better, more efficient system, but also make sure that we don't have to build so much new parking since there's already parking available for people. The second idea is to move to a more demand-responsive management of the on-street parking system. It's challenging today to adjust the parking rates. It's done via council action, and initiate parking plans, takes years and years of collected effort to get what going. But in reality, we can do better. We have a toolbox that will help us get there, and also a new approach. Technology, you can see now the smart meters that we have now compared to the coin one operating in the 30s. These things can do a lot more. They can be, they carry information, they can charge different rates and so forth, and we want to be able to use that to better manage parking in the future. So we're calling that new approach performance-based parking management, and we'll show you a few slides in a little bit what other cities are doing on this topic. And the third thing, and Grant will lead that later on, would be to address the issue that we talked earlier, that the parking spill over into single-family neighborhoods. People come to the main street, new development, hot new restaurants, and how do we address that conflict that is developed over the years and that you addressed in 2013 via the new parking regulations for off-street development. So with that, I'll move on to provide you a deeper level on the central city. Is that okay? All right, let me take a little bit of water. So we work with a committee, about 30 members, all throughout last year. And the things that we're touching on, will be primarily zoning code that will come to you as part of the Central City Plan. That's on the lower right. Starting late May, we'll be having briefings here and hearing. But also, as the performance-based parking management will take to council this spring to start the program, and those will, those policies, if we were to implement them, will live in Title 16 and Title 17 in admin rules. So we formed a committee and we decided what to do. We were very closely working with BPS and make sure that the parking policies that we develop are in sync with the direction of the Central City 2035 plan. So we want to, as foundational principles before we got to work, make sure that we wanted to encourage the development of the Central City, support the most split goals for the Central City Plan, continue to limit the growth of parking, as we've done in the past. It's been a good recipe for us. But at the same time, introduce greater flexibility for how parking is used in existing parking and also future parking, and simplify existing regulations, which are about 100 pages long, and only a few people in the world can understand. Here's one next to me. The growth of this, so basically, we are expecting, as part of Central City, to grow by about 50,000 jobs and 37,000 households. The trick is how to do that, without affecting livability, make sure that our transportation system can handle this growth. And the way to do it is certainly to have a smart parking management that is in sync with these policies and has also supports investments in multimodal network and infrastructure, So here's the summary slide, and I will get into a little bit more detail. But basically what we did was simplify a process called Central City Parking Review. Many of these, you come in for development, sometimes, you got to go through this new track, more expensive, more onerous. We're simplifying. Only a few cases now will go through CCPR, what we're calling. Reduce the parking sectors from 26 to 6. I'll show a picture in a little bit. Adjust the parking ratios. Every building can build up to an amount, no more. We adjusted those, we calibrated them. We're providing new limitations for new surface parking lots, and we're simplifying the preservation parking regulations. I'll give you an example. And we're removing barriers to shared parking, to how parking can be operated. So on the simplification, 26 sectors to 6. On the left, you have existing. On the right, the proposed. That simplifies the code quite a bit. We had a core and non-core. That's the gray and non-gray, a further level of complexity in the code. So we have a cleaner way to do it. We have 6 official types of parking that you could get approved for. We reduced them to 4, basically combining commercial and residential and hotel into one. Growth parking, we call it. We're allowing sharing of parking. If you have parking today in a structure, or if you're going to have a new one in the future, we will allow you to sell it commercially to have somebody across the street, or for events, schnitzer, open up the gates. That would be allowed so long as it's in a structure. And again, I already talked about the simplification of the code and the triggers for CCPR. Sorry, I think I'm repeating myself a little bit here. So that's the simplification side. On the parking ratio, we had a long tradition here in Central City having no minimum parking requirement. We continue that, and we had maximum ratios on some uses, particularly office and residential, but not all of them. Now we're putting ratios on all of the uses in the zoning code. And we adjusted the ratios downward in total, about 30%. You could be able to build 30% less than if you were forced to build to the maximum. Under these new regulations, you build about 30% less. And we standardized some things. Residential and hotels pretty much get one ratio throughout the Central City. That's what developers are building to anyway, about 1 per unit. So that is our recommendation. You see the surface parking lot. This is a view of like from Big Pink towards PSU, and you see the Morrison ramps. That's what we're trying to rebuild, and we've done a pretty good job so far. About half of these lots have been redeveloped since that we began to count in as part of the CCMP 95. About 2,000 of them have gone away. So on surface parking lot, basically we're limiting no new surface parking lots. They will be prohibited with new development. Today, you could build from 20 in the core, in the downtown area, in the closer area, and 60 in the outer areas. Now we will be saying no new surface parking lot. The exception would be in the industrial zones, the light gray in the central east side and lower Albina, where for industrial uses, traditional industrial uses, warehousing, machinery, you could be able to have some. If somebody would come in for rehabilitation of a structure, that would not really trigger it. You're just changing the use, not significantly changing the structure. We will allow you to keep the surface parking lot. So that is the recommendation now. Yes.
So could someone build a structured parking lot, not a surface, but a structured parking, just parking, no development above it?
No, the answer is yes and no, actually. No, sorry. I was trying not to talk about that so that we can move forward. Basically, but I can provide a 30-second answer. Parking, we didn't want to tear down buildings and build just parking. So you cannot build, it's called growth parking. So you can build parking with new development, for long-term parking. There's one exception called visitor parking. That's how the smart park got built. You could come to the city as part of CCPR, do a study of a demand study, and say, you know what, I went around 3 or 4 blocks and I counted spaces inside buildings and outside buildings, and I can tell you via the study that this area is parking deficient for short-term use, not long-term use, for retail use, for example. And then, we go through the paperwork and we allow you to do it, to build it. The trick is that you need to operate it as short-term. So you cannot be selling it for commuters. So only the city has 3 visitor parking structures have been built by the private sector. It's pretty expensive, and we have Smart Park to supplement that. So it is possible, but it's not very common. It's called visitor parking. So.
Okay, so just to be clear, they couldn't renovate an existing building and put parking into it.
That's the second one. Yes, you can do that.
They can.
Yeah.
So they could renovate let's say, if it became vacant, they could create a parking structure inside of a building.
Oh, good question. I don't. Preservation. Yeah, but they're taking away growth. They're taking away the actual.
It'd be a remodel, I guess,
So you would have no longer office, but just parking.
just parking.
What do you think of that?
I'm asking because someone's actually thinking about doing that in
Yeah.
where I work down on the Central East Side.
The trick, I'll go through preservation parking, it may help you. The issue is that the parking needs to be accounted for something. If it's for another building,
No, it's a commercial parking lot for parking. That's what it would be. I don't need an answer
Yeah.
today, but I'm just trying to,
Yeah, it depends on what zone it's in, but hey, Mauricio, this is a high-level
Yeah.
discussion
okay.
today.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's all these categories, like what Mauricio was describing of how you allocate that overall parking supply in the central city, but you're not getting into that level of detail today, or?
no, but generally speaking, we don't allow new parking unless it comes with new growth. The
Okay.
exception could be short-term visitor parking and preservation parking, which I'll explain right now. So
Okay.
preservation parking is this another category. We have an example. Basically, it's for parking for all buildings, historic buildings that did not have parking to begin with, or for buildings that don't have enough parking. They build very little. So basically, it's a mechanism for all buildings to remain economically competitive. So it assures parking for buildings without it. So and also encourages new development to not build to the top. Because you can always build more later to meet your entitlement. So here's an example: an old building that doesn't have any parking, but it has entitlement. So we drew a little box, orange box on top. So that building uses the parking lot across the street for their customers and for their employees. Well, a developer wants to redevelop that lot. That's the case of Old Town. Oh my God, I'm losing the parking. They can use that entitlement on top, to come to the developer and say, can we build me another deck of parking for me? Using my entitlement, so that orange box kind of moves, to the new building underground. I put it here in this example, but basically you can use it. It is as if it was part of the building, but in reality, somebody else is building it for you. And if you have leftover, a second building could do it, until you use your entitlement. So that's a way in which an old building that doesn't have as much parking or doesn't have any parking could create more parking to serve their needs. So that's a way in which the code allows for new parking without getting growth. So there are two ways: visitor parking and preservation parking. We're maintaining this mechanism. It's a lot more complicated than this. So we're simplifying it, and also we're expanding this preservation parking tool to residential and hotel uses as well. So
Can I ask quickly?
Yeah.
What's a parking entitlement?
It would be, each building, like this one, I guess, if it's entitled to I don't want to get into the math. If it's entitled to 100 spaces, but it built none, it's still entitled to 100 spaces.
Okay.
It basically is allowing developer B to build some of the 100 for
So
this
it's
building.
a capacity that's attached to every building?
Yeah.
But there's no money that goes with it or anything like that?
Well, somebody's got to pay for the parking, so
Yeah, somebody would have to pay for the parking,
Yeah,
yes.
but basically, just like FAR, this building is sitting on a large box of FAR that is used or not used. There could still be some extra FAR that could be transferred for parking. Some of that parking can be used in another site in the future. So that's how it works.
Real quick, this is
Yeah.
kind of getting the weeds, so we'll make it quick. So if parking ratio, let's say, is 0.7 per thousand, it's going up to 1 per thousand, does that new 1 per thousand get entitled for the transfer?
Yeah.
Got it.
So to summarize, that was the summary on the zoning. It's actually in the code, again, it's 100 pages, so this is quite a summary. But those are the big ideas. On the public side, we want to continue to prioritize what's on the street for short stays for visitors to the central city. Prioritize the off-street, the smart park, for visitors, not commuters, but also for longer stays. If you're coming here for several hours, We'd rather have you park in the smart park, not on the street. And thirdly, we want to move to a new system of managing parking called performance-based parking management. So what is that? It's the new thing that many cities are implementing, including Seattle and San Francisco, the examples that I'll mention now. Our committee, Central City, strongly recommended that we adopt this. So we're going to council in spring again to initiate this program citywide. So basically, we establish performance targets, certain occupancy level, and we coordinate the smart park and the on-street parking, and we adjust the rates based on, so that we meet that parameter. Here's an example from San Francisco. San Francisco was able to do it per block. We won't be able to do it per block. The technology is, very expensive. They had a $20 million grant. But basically, what it does is maximizes customer experience. It's a data-driven process, not driven by revenue, and improves reliability. Basically, if a block is very full, you raise the rates. If an area is underused, nobody parks there, you lower the rates, and if you get about 85% occupancy, which is the industry standard now, you don't need to act. And very clearly, cities are doing this. It's very clear, transparent. There's nice graphics that go there, and there's reporting that is done, monitoring. So here's an example from Seattle. They watch you. They keep it within if you do counts in occupancy and you're within a range, no action. If you're getting, your parking is getting tight, we put you on a watch list. If it's about a certain threshold, we act. And so in the same, if parking is not being as utilized, eventually we lower the rate. And everything gets published, and the rules are clear, and we act on it. So that's the model that we want to move towards as soon as council gives us the green light.
So does that mean that you'll be able to set rates administratively without council action?
That would be the hope, yeah. It may be that we work within a certain parameter, but that's how it works. Yeah, so. And then most likely it'll be like Seattle, we won't be doing it per block, but rather by area. We would develop parking areas like Old Town could be a logical place, downtown, Pearl District, South Waterfront, markets, parking markets, and then we would watch their performance and adjust the rates so that we get to that performance target that we're talking about. So that's it for the Central City. So next steps, we will come back to you in late May as part of the Central City Plan with the big document for your review. But we'll go to council sooner than that, we hope, in spring 2016 to ask council to initiate the program, the performance-based parking management. Okay? Thank you. And now, I guess if there are any Central City questions, I guess.
Are we going to just wait to the end and then ask them, or do you want to go through? So
If it's Central City based.
it is Central City. It's Central City. It's Central East Side, but it's the concern I have, and you don't need to address it, is that in the Central East Side, there is enough demand that you can probably pencil a structured parking lot to build privately and fill it and make money, I think. And that's just going in and buying a building, tearing it down, and remodeling it to a structure. If that's not our intent, we need to figure that out, because I think that'll be the first place that you'll see them. But it seems to me, if it's just a test of, is there the ability that there's too much parking, and Central East Side meets that criteria because we've oversold the permit parking in that area, then they meet it by default almost, that you would say yes. And if we're not intending to do that, we need to rethink how we couch our code, because there are people kind of circling the block in the Central East Side, looking at buildings and trying to figure out, are you going to allow that or not?
Yeah, you could, somebody from the private sector or the PDC, they could go ahead and
Well,
build.
not PDC, but the private sector.
Yeah, the private sector could. They can now build parking.
Is that
Reservation
our
park-
intent, I'm asking, is that our intent in the future, that we want to have land taken up with structured parking. The difference is we have and I'm comparing that to the position of, we say we want to limit surface parking, but we're okay with structured parking. I'm asking the balancing question.
Yeah, we allow structured parking today. We will allow it in the future. There are requirements, that it's in some cases be wrapped around ground floor.
No, I mean,
activities.
just standalone structured parking. We're limiting, I guess I'm confused of why we're limiting surface parking, but the person could come in and say on the same piece of property, yeah, put up 10 stories of structured parking, and that's okay, but I can't take the lot and say it's a surface parking lot.
Oh, okay, that's an urban form issue. You can get a lot more parking in a structure. You can build on top of a structure. You can put the structure underground.
No, I mean, let's stick with the idea that it's just going to be structured. There's no residential or anything, it's just a parking lot. Why one, not the other? And if you're saying, I guess I'm hearing, just because it's 10 stories versus one, that's okay.
Well, so think of it this way. It's the more intense use of the land, and the expense of structured parking. So to get that more intense use, the more intense use is what we're interested in. Throwing down some asphalt and using it for parking is not, especially in a transit-rich neighborhood like the Central East Side, especially in a place that's so close to employment centers, both in the Central East Side and across the river, right? Especially now we have streetcar and we've always had bus. So, but the part of this that we didn't quite get into today, and that I will admit even I'm a little fuzzy on, so I'm looking forward to the Central City presentation, is that to build that commercial parking structure, the developer would have to get the rights to build parking from somewhere. And the rights to build parking, I'm looking at these guys to correct me, is this preservation parking idea, Andre?
Yes.
So a building that existed before a certain date that did not have parking, hypothetically has the right to have so many parking spaces, X number of parking spaces developed for its interests or use. The only other way you can get parking, stop me if I'm going wrong, is if you're building new development, then you can get a certain amount of parking per square foot of new development you're building as well. And then a third type is visitor parking, but it's an anomaly. That's that one that Mauricio described. So part of the way you think about it for a district is, okay, if the number of spaces you can build comes from the amount of development you have in the district. So if it gets all piled onto one spot or spread around to a whole bunch of buildings, for a parking purpose, the way at least the logic of the system we have built, it doesn't really matter. And even when you build a parking structure in the central city, to the extent that you can really get it to pencil, you have to put in active ground floor uses and and that's the kind of thing you don't get with the surface lot, besides the number of years it's going to take to pay off. It's tens of thousands of dollars of space. So that's, and then every space that exists weakens the market for someone else to build parking. So, if you wanted to build a parking supply in a place, having it in a structure in sort of one, utilizing, that amount of space for this one purpose is, it'd be great to spread it around, but you also really do crimp the economic motivation to build parking beyond that.
And would the code require ground floor active uses in a structure like that?
I believe it does.
All right. And I'll just reflect that, everybody assumes it's a no-brainer that there's a market for parking garage on Northwest 23rd, right? And Joe and I were part of an effort more than a decade ago to figure out where we might allow that and even make some extra allowances to allow that to happen. And yet the market has continued to choose to take all those opportunities and put retail buildings on them instead of parking. So it may not be the highest and best use, even if it's possible.
Right, and the part of this, when we get into it, that gets really confusing too, is short-term versus long-term, how that plays to making a part of the central city, like the Central East Side, function like a park and ride, which would be suboptimal too, right? And so when we get into those rules or discussions, when Mauricio comes back with the central city plan, those are the questions we need to explore. And just even, last thing is on PDC's work on examining use of the ODOT blocks, maybe for structured parking. Even that is not that easy to pencil, although that changes, with the market.
So I don't know the conversations that went into it before, but I mean, just from a standpoint of air pollution, wouldn't it make more sense to have a single parking structure rather than people idling around looking for parking spaces? So wouldn't there be an incentive for one large structure?
It's the amount of parking, not so much the surface versus structure. But again, looking for parking does add up quite a bit to the circulation, the car going around it. We haven't done the study here in Portland, but it could be 30% of the traffic in some cities, are basically the same person going around looking for parking. So performance-based parking management will help you that, by actually, if you would have a space where you want to go, you don't have to be circling around. So that has led in other cities, in San Francisco, they've been able to demonstrate that has improvements to transit reliability and safety, for example. So we want to replicate that here.
In that situation, don't they actually have an app, or they have the ability? You have the ability to go
Yeah.
online, and you know that there's a space.
And that's a technology that we don't have at this point,
So
but,
people aren't going around so much.
but at the same time, we want to begin to transition into a new program, better use technology, which has changed a lot and has opened up a lot of opportunities to monitor, to know what's out there, and to react in a quicker manner. So that's what we'll be working with asking council very soon.
Not to belabor it, but you're also talking different types of people. So typically the people parking on the surface lot, like you were saying, are maybe going to retail functions. They're not the people who are there all day, like Andre's talking about, Central East Side, who need a place to put their car while they're at work. And that's where those parking garages more often, unless it's visitor parking, get built, is for the long-term parkers.
But that's why we want to limit the amount of parking, so that you don't have that congestion, that we want to encourage people to take transit, walk, and bike, and carpool.